In this video, we will go over important information regarding your first test on exploration. You can see here all of the information is posted on Canvas. So let's first mention the date, which is Tuesday, September 15th. The format of the test, 60 multiple choice questions. You will be given 55 minutes to complete this test. So you do need to make sure you're properly prepared so that you don't run out of time. Because once you open it, your timer will begin. So make sure you have a good internet connection. There are no distractions near you because I cannot reopen a test under any circumstances. So make sure everything is as good as it can be as far as your internet connection. All right, as far as preparing for the test, for multiple choice, you don't want to make it a guessing game, okay? Especially you'll run out of time if you're completely unsure and you spend too much time on, one or more questions. So you want to make sure that you are comfortable and you know the material. So here's my suggestion. You have gone through this chapter highlighting the most important information that you study. So what you need to do, and you should have been looking over this a little bit every day so it doesn't become overwhelming and be a last minute cramming session, you look over that highlighted material. Okay, so I would start there with your outline notes, going back and focusing on key people, key events, certain groups that we went over, make some connections with a compare and a contrast. If you can answer the who, what, when, where, why, how, results, if you can do that, then you are going to do well. After you've gone through your notes, you'll need to look over the text assignment that you submitted for a grade. I'm going to show you what it looks like to remind you. These 10 questions, you all submitted your answers, and what I need you to do is go back and read through this and make sure you understand the answers to each of these questions, because some of these questions have been reworded in a multiple choice format, okay? The most missed question that I want to just quickly address with y'all is number 4, right here. It says, what group built the town of Santa Fe and what is the meaning of Santa Fe? So make sure you know the group that built the town were Catholic priests and conquistadors that were Spanish. So the best way to say this would be Spanish, Catholic priests, and conquistadors. Okay? So again, make sure, most of y'all got this part right with the meaning, but for the actual group, many of you missed that because you weren't specific enough. So make sure when you study, you are specific. The rest of these questions, the majority of you got right. If there is a question you don't understand what the correct answer is, then just send me a message and I can give you that answer. But remember, all of these are in the book and you can easily go back and look for them. Now, since this is our first major test, I want to also point out to some of you that if you have a way to study that has worked well for you in the past, then continue that study method, okay? But for some of you, you may not have good study habits, or you've never had to study for a course like this. So there's a couple things you can do. Some students like to make note cards, and note cards are good as long as you use them the right way, okay? Some students like to have a parent, call out things to them to kind of, review things with them. That's a great idea. You could always Zoom with, some of your friends, and y'all can kind of go back and forth and quiz each other. That's always a fun thing to do. So there's a couple of things that you can definitely do to help, understand the material and repetitively go over it. Because if you only look at it one time, it's not going to stick. You've got to read it, you've got to understand it, you've got to interpret it. Something else I've included as some good review material is a study checklist. So when you click on each of these, I'm going to show you what page 1 looks like first, and then I'll show you page 2. Okay, this is page 1 of my study checklist. Now let me explain what that means. This does not mean these are the only topics on your test, okay? This is a guide to make sure that you have this information in your notebook, okay? Because more than likely, there will be test questions about all of these topics. So you are in good shape if you have the notes on these topics, okay? So what I like to do is just create these little study checklists for students to go back, and it helps, review some of the key things. Now, if you highlighted something that's not on this checklist, go back and look at it, okay? Because this checklist isn't perfect. I do accidentally leave things off. So that's why I said don't solely rely on just these 2 pages of the checklist. So I'm going to show you the second page in a minute, but first let me address a couple things on this page that you want to make sure that you go back and understand. First, I want to point out these 2 explorers right here that students often get confused: Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama. So when you're studying, make a point to know that they're both Spanish explorers, but the main difference is Diaz is the one that sailed to the southern tip of Africa, and then he had to go back because of the storms, okay? Da Gama is the one that makes history by finding the all-water route from Europe to Asia, and then he made it back with all of those spices, okay? So you definitely want to make sure you don't confuse those 2 individuals. Pedro Cabral is another explorer sometimes students get confused with others. Remember, he is the one that will claim Brazil for Portugal, okay? So very important you remember Cabral and his claim to fame there. Magellan's, of course, the one that circumnavigated the globe. He's the one that claimed the Philippines for Spain, and we know the Strait of Magellan is named in his honor. Someone else that you may possibly get confused with if you don't pay attention is Bartholomew de las Casas versus Bartholomew Diaz. Their first names are basically the same, but the difference, and of course they're both Spanish, okay? But remember, we already talked about what Diaz did. De las Casas is the one that accompanied Columbus and Columbus's men on that second voyage to try to find Asia, and he's the one that witnessed the mistreatment of the natives by the Spanish. Okay, so again, please make sure you don't confuse Diaz with de las Casas. Pizarro and Cortez, again, what do they have in common? Spanish conquistadors. So you're going to go back and look over what a conquistador and specifically what these 2 men were known for. John Smith and John Rolfe, again, easy to confuse because they have the same first name. They're both Englishmen. They both have a connection to the Jamestown colony in Virginia. But remember, Smith is the one that created the rule, he who doesn't work doesn't eat, and helped save Jamestown. And then Rolfe is responsible for the tobacco crop being sold in England as a cash crop. So we know tobacco will also help save Jamestown. Miles Standish, don't forget, He is the one that will help organize the pilgrims in a military structure to keep them protected from any natives. Winthrop, remember, he is the longtime governor for the Puritans. Okay, so again, these are people you could make note cards to help you remember what their importance is. Stuyvesant, Dutch governor, okay, of the New Netherlands. Be careful with these early native chiefs, Montezuma, Atahualpa, and then of course Metacom is going to be over in North America. Remember, Montezuma, Atahualpa are in Mexico. You've got an Aztec chief, you've got the Inca chief. So again, be very careful not to confuse all three of these. And remember, Metacom is the one that the English will call King Philip. Okay? So I wanted to remind you of that. With these notable groups, again, go back and look over the specific details we went over about each of these groups. Remember, be careful with the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas, okay? Look over what they have in common. They're all three early native civilizations to their areas. Remember, you've got the Aztecs and the Mayans both in different parts of Mexico. You found the Incas in Peru, which is in South America, okay? All three of them will ultimately be conquered by Spanish conquistadors. I gave you the specific ones for Aztecs and Mayans. Remember, Aztecs, you can go back up here and connect it to Cortez. The Incas, you can go back up here and connect to Pizarro. So make those connections because I promise you it'll help you in the long run. Pilgrims versus Puritans, okay? In a review, some of you were in class when I talked about looking at similarities and differences. If you didn't get to hear me say that, I'm going to say it here in the video. You've got the similarities being they are both coming from England to the New World for religious freedom. Okay, those are the similarities, and they both settled in and around present-day Massachusetts. Remember, Pilgrims are at Plymouth, and the Puritans are at Massachusetts Bay Colony. Pilgrims are called separatists because they want to separate from the Church of England, which is also called the Anglican Church. Puritans want to purify the Anglican Church or the Church of England, which means they want to make changes to it. Okay? So again, know the differences. That's the key difference between the two. And of course, you know to go back and look over the Cajuns as well as the Vikings. All right, on this second column, I'm going to point out a couple things just as reminders. You've got the Italian Muslim monopoly. Don't forget that that was first broken by the Portuguese. They were the ones that broke the Italian Muslim monopoly by finding that all water route from Europe to Asia. And then remember, the English and the Dutch come along later to break the Portuguese monopoly. Okay, so again, go back and look over that. You have leading commercial centers, it says right here. Remember, we went over two, London and Amsterdam. Go back and look over the reasons why, specifically with the Jewish population. Some of this stuff I'm skipping over because it's very easy and you should be able to find this very quickly in your notes. Remember the price revolution? You're going to have inflation in countries that were bringing in a lot of gold and silver. For example, Spain. Spain, we said, is the first to feel those effects because, you know, people like Cortez and Pizarro, they were bringing in shiploads of gold and silver. Make sure you don't get a peninsular and a viceroy mixed up. Remember, the peninsulars were the Spanish-born men who are now in New America, and they are going to be the leaders, okay? Viceroy is a peninsular. It's just what they call the Spanish governor of the New World. The next video will continue this information.